right, why don't we get this show on the road? Come on in, sit down. It's showtime. All you faculty back there. Look at this crowd. This is great. This is the, for those of you who don't know, this is the 21st annual Kenneth Smith Symposium. 21st. This event has been going on for longer than some of you have been alive, actually, and President myself excluded, of course. Ken Smith ran the Public Relations Studies program in the School of Journalism some years ago and is considered to be one of the, really the founders of the program. So if you're wondering who he was, that's Ken Smith. He ran a very successful program, and it's only grown over the years. As an example of that, let's see, would all of the PR students, graduate or undergraduate, please stand up? Let's see them. Let's see the PR students. Yeah. Thank you. We now have, in the undergraduate PR program, we have 240 students. And in the graduate program, which we only started a relatively few years ago, we now have about 115 students. So we're growing, but more important than just growing, we're growing in a healthy way. The students are great. They're incredible to work with. I know the faculty folks they just feel wonderful about working with the students. And speaking of faculty, I know we've got a bunch of folks here. Would the faculty please stand up? The PR faculty and journalism faculty. So thanks to all of you. This looks like a full house. This may well be the biggest crowd that we've ever had for a Smith Symposium, and it's very kind of all of you to come out on a night like this, especially when there's free food. Now, I'd like to introduce Brian O'Connor, who's the president of the PRSA-LA. He's our partner in pulling together this event. And Brian is Director of Communications and Public Relations, I think it is, for Cunard Line, right? So, and he's promised us all free cruises. We were talking about it earlier. So please, you want to welcome him with a big round of applause.
Thank you, Jerry. Good evening, everyone. In the spirit of the Stand and Be Recognized, I would also like to ask the board members from PRSA-LA who are here with us tonight, would you also stand so we can recognize you? These men and women volunteer. These are senior level PR practitioners, so hopefully students, you spotted some of them, and we certainly encourage you to approach them this evening to learn more about PRSA, and we certainly invite you to visit our website at prsala.org to learn more about the organization as well as PRSSA, our student chapter, which hopefully many of you are involved with. I have two brief announcements that I want to make on behalf of the chapter. The first is on the table upstairs where you checked in, there is a flyer. Oops, sorry. There's a flyer which has information about a program that we have just begun promoting that hopefully all of you in the room, students, you are invited to attend as well. Our lead-in for this is Sustainability Communications is Public Relations Delivering on the Green Promise. So our board members and an excellent committee are putting together a program that will be a half-day program on Monday, May 16th in Santa Monica. So please take a look at the flyer. There's some great information on there about what the scope of the program will be about. And we certainly invite and encourage all of you to attend and be part of this very informative educational program. The next announcement that I'd like to make is on behalf of one of our gold chapter sponsors, which is Business Wire. We've had a long-standing partnership with Business Wire. We absolutely appreciate the support that they give PRSA-LA. And what I want to point out is also another flyer that's upstairs is about a video contest for students. So all of you who are here in the program, please pick up this flyer, and I'll just mention some brief words about it. Business Wire is offering college students the chance to win a trip to New York to meet Warren Buffett. Many of you probably know who that is, with the division of the company, and who that gentleman is, of course, as part of their 50th anniversary. It's a college video contest. The contest provides an opportunity for the next generation of communication professionals, or communicators, I should say, to share their vision of where they see public relations and communications headed in the coming years. Video submissions will be reviewed by a special judging committee of the Business Wire senior managers on creativity, originality, and appropriateness to the theme. And so you can find more information about this on Business Wire's Facebook page. And again, the details on that are on this flyer upstairs. Jerry, back to you.
Thank you, Brian. When we were looking for a person to set the scene for our discussion of the shifting PR journalism relationship, several people immediately recommended Steve Rubel. Like 3 or 4 people immediately said, this is the guy we have to get. At Edelman, which is the world's largest PR agency, Steve has one of the all-time great titles, something we all aspire to, Director of Insights. And Steve, I hope that doesn't mean that other people at the firm can't have them or something like that. This is you up here, right? This is the guy with the hand pointing up, having that great insight.
Just so you know, before that photo was taken, he died.
Really? Oh, okay, all right, that's refreshing. In his role, Steve maintains a focus on the long view. He studies trends and innovations in media, technology, and digital culture, and fuses these into actionable insights that help Edelman and its clients remain at the forefront. In addition to serving as a strategic advisor to the firm's teams and clients, he also acts as a highly visible Edelman ambassador and thought leader to the startup community and the industry as a whole. He's a popular speaker around the world and appears frequently in the press. In addition, he actively shares his observations and insights at steverubel.com, his monthly advertising age column, and on Twitter, where he has a meager 50,000 followers. He's been named to several prestigious lists, including PR Week's 40 Under 40 and the Forbes.com Web Celeb 25. Prior to joining Edelman, by the way, Edelman is now the world's largest PR agency. Is that correct, Steve? Which is quite a compliment to the firm and its team. He's been named to several lists. Prior to joining Edelman in 2006, he worked for 15 years in a variety of marketing communications positions in corporate, nonprofit, and small, mid-sized firms. Steve's presentation on thought leadership in the age of saturation will establish the context for the panel discussion and the hopefully very active question and answer period that will follow. Steve?
Well, that introduction is very, very nice. Thank you for having me here today. It's quite an honor. So I'm going to give a new presentation tonight. One I haven't really given before, at least in a larger group, on a topic that we've been thinking a lot about, which is authority in the age of overload, and particularly. I'm obsessed with the concept of overload, which is all this content that we have in a finite amount of time, and that's a theme that's going to run throughout tonight's presentation. A little bit about what I do. So the key word in my title is not so much insights as it is director. I am largely a curator, and I spend a lot of my time talking to our teams around the world. We have 3,500 people on the ground in 55 offices around the globe. Our clients are all large multinationals and from a diverse range of industries: healthcare, consumer technology, consumer products, government, NGOs. So I spend a lot of my time on the road just kind of understanding what are the key trends. I talk to a lot of people in the media. I talk to a lot of thinkers and also the platforms. I go to see Twitter and Facebook and so forth. Out of that, I work with a team, and we extract what we think are some major ideas that are going to impact our clients in the next, say, 12 to 24 months. And we try to provide them with some actionable recommendations. So the idea here is for us to kind of be a curator, to find important ideas, and to help use them to really kind of inspire our clients to innovate and to be, as Jerry mentioned, ahead of the curve. So I'm going to start with a story. And I'm going to talk about the evolution of authority. And it's a play that takes place in 3 acts. So, some of you may be too young to remember, but which is scary, but okay. But let's talk about Act One of the Internet, which was the era of commercialization. So from 1994 to 2002, the only people who really could become credible voices of authority in a digital context was people with deep pockets. The press, large corporations, and then there were a few early first mover startups that generated a lot of capital either through private equity or through the public markets at the time, such as Yahoo or Amazon, and were actually able to become voices of authority. So much like the media landscape, before the internet, the first few years, 94 to 2002, really looked like, the media landscape as always. The power went to those with money, and anybody, those people were the ones who had voice, and the rest of us were more consumers, not creators. Although obviously some of that was beginning to change, but that's what took place during that time. And by the way, these eras are not. They're not like one ended, one began. There was an overlap, and there was a continuation. So this continues to this day. The next era, which started around 2002 and continued to 2010, and that part I think is going to be controversial, was the era of democratization. So what happened was, we had the dot-com crash. The cost of publishing and the technical barriers went down to nothing. Anybody could become a publisher. And it started with blogging. It continued with YouTube. And then obviously Facebook and Twitter. And then obviously continuous evolution of platforms. But basically the internet, the barriers to publishing, the right to publish, the right to become an influential voice of authority became open to anyone. And we saw, that was something that we would largely call the social media era. That was it was ushered in really by the dot-com crash and the cost of storage and bandwidth going down, as well as the rise and proliferation of mobile devices. I think in the U.S. and the UK, this era is starting to come to an end, if not already. In other developing markets, it is still going strong. This image is from Egypt earlier this year, and the sign says, "Thank you, Facebook." Okay, and that's something for them was a completely new experience, where for us it's a little bit more of old hat. So with this change, like I said, it started around 2002. We began to see it in our data. We began to see dramatic shifts in trust. So we do a study every year called the Edelman Trust Barometer. You can find it on our website at edelman.com. And we've been doing it for 10 years now. And we ask opinion leaders, informed publics, people who are really media consumers globally, who they trust, what kind of spokespeople, who they trust, trust in media, trust in CEOs, trust in really different sources of authority. A little hard to read here, but this frame from 2006, we saw around 2005, 2006, a person like myself, a peer, somebody who we perceived to be like ourselves, was the most trusted source people would turn to for information about companies. And that was a major shift at the time. So, and that was ushered in by this dramatic change, by the fact that we all could publish, everybody could publish, and now information was much more accessible than ever before. But I think that era is over. It doesn't mean it doesn't continue. We're going to continue to publish. Social networking sites and social media sites will continue to become powerful. But the sources of authority and how we look at this is going to change. The reality is now we have too much content and not enough time. Okay. What we have seen is that, for example, more information is being created today than existed in entirety before 2003. You think about that. That's a staggering statistic. So now, you have multiple sources of information. Where 5-10 years ago, your sources were the guys who owned the pipes and really could afford it. Now, if you go on Facebook, everybody. It's open to everybody. But there's an overload issue in both information and friends. Over the last 3 years in particular, there's been a friends arms race. Okay? He or she who dies with the most friends or followers wins. But the reality is, and believe me, clients of ours all want, they're asking us all the time, how do we get more Twitter followers? How do we get more Facebook friends? Or fans, I should say. That's all really important. Those are good metrics to want to strive to. But ultimately, it's getting difficult to stand out even in that noise. Lady Gaga has 30 million fans on Facebook. Anybody a fan of Lady Gaga? Oh, okay. You go. Sometimes they go and you get 2, and sometimes you get a whole room. I'm a fan of Lady Gaga on Facebook. I'm not ashamed to say that. I have to keep young. That and speaking college campuses helps me. I never see her content in my newsfeed. Okay, and those of you, who also have fans may never see that content either, because it's at the whim of what's happening in your social ecosystem. If there's a breakup in your social circle, somebody breaks up with somebody, that's going to push Gaga all the way aside. And you're going to see that. Babies, much bigger than Gaga. Okay, photos of babies and kids, big. So that's now the environment. Now, the social filters are, curating that information for us. But still, we're making choices in where we spend our time. And now we're looking to a diversity of sources, and I think that people are going to start to say, you know what, there's quality here that I got to find, and I'm going to go find it. And so we're now in this age of validation. We went from the era of commercialization to democratization to validation, which is I want experts or people who are high quality who matter to me. Now that could be like, your mother or not. Maybe she's on the fringe. I don't know. That's for you and your shrink. But ultimately, it's going to be what are the most important authoritative sources that I want to follow, and they better be valid. So the signs of that started late in 2009. If you actually squinted, you could see it. At the end of 2009, the Oxford Dictionary word of the year was unfriend. Unfriend. How many people here get requests to be somebody's Facebook friend from people you don't know, never met, don't know who the heck they are, live in other countries, other planets? Okay. Every hand. How many of you accept them? Don't be ashamed. Okay, 1, 2. Okay. So, you're part of the friending. You won the friends race. Congratulations. There's a door prize at the end. Maybe it's a cruise. But I think this is an indication that there's just too much friending going on. It reminds me of the 60s when other stuff went on. And so there was this kind of friending overload. And there was a study done that found out that people don't know 1/5 of their Facebook friends. Actually do not know them. So, there's a lot of people who do accept those friend requests because they want to be seen as having, 5,000 friends. By the way, there is a 5,000 friend limit on Facebook. You cannot get more than 5,000 friends. They actually will try and stop you. And then for those of you, because then you're like a city or a town at that point, and then obviously for those of you who use these technologies, who use Twitter and Facebook, you're facing the overload problem. And again, I look at USA Today is great. I read that because it's like a grounding in like what's happening, like in Iowa. And I'm gonna read that, and I'm gonna say, okay, I'm gonna get different perspectives. I want to read the Journal and Times, but a lot of times the Journal and Times, at least on this topic, they're covering first world problems. And I want to know, kind of like how mainstream America sees things. So I saw this story a couple months ago from a reporter who I know a long time, and it says social media users grapple with information overload. It's an underutilized word, grapple. And so I'm thinking this is again a first world problem. We have social media overload, but again it's a sign. It's a sign that this is now people are saying I'm going to make choices about where I spend my time. So again, we had a lot of fun the last few years. We all were merry and we drank, and now we have a hangover. And we're looking for validation. Let's come back to the data. So the 2006 Trust Barometer data that I showed you earlier showed that people were looking for peers as the most trusted sources. We saw, though, that change in the last couple of years of data. Now, let me show you this one. The number one source that people turn to for news about a company is search engines, followed by online news sources. Search engines first. Why? Because they want diversity of sources. They don't want just one. They want diversity, and they want to be able to, get deeper into something, or it's fast. And it's a way for them to kind of just do drive-by, grazing of content. So, that is a sign of validation. They're looking for validated sources, and they trust Google and Bing to be able to surface that content, and also, to some degree, Twitter search. And then we looked at spokespeople. So remember, it's getting hard to read, but the person like yourself is the box on the right. That was very high in 2006. We saw that slowly drop over the last 5 years. And I believe that is because of the over-friending problem. Now, the entire social networking has, to some degree, devalued the concept of friendship. It's devalued it. Now, because if you think about what a friend was, 4, 5, 6 years ago, it was somebody you wrote, you IM'd, or you called, or God forbid, you met them in person. Okay? What we call we call that the meet space, by the way, the meet, M-E-A-T, not M-E-E-T, because that requires like atoms and bits. So we saw that happen. A person like yourself went down, but we saw on the left-hand side that an academic or expert, those of you who are academics in the room, I didn't hear the giant cheer, but I'm sure there is somewhere professors that are yelling about this in a good way. Were highly trusted and sought after, including also, we looked at for the first time, a technical expert in a company. And that's not just the guy in the server room. That's, this is like domain level experts, people who have experts in a given area. Expertise, I should say, in a given area. They're now the most trusted, which to me says, I want all the BS out, and I want the good stuff, and I want what's important to me in. And this is just natural. It's just, it's just a filtering on top of the filters. So now we have filters on top of filters. Those of you in PR, it just got harder. It just got harder because now social content is curating traditional content, and now there are multiple layers of the onion that we have to peel away. It's going to be more challenging than ever, not easier. So on one level, you could say, it's easier. There's more sources than ever to tell your story. Yes. But the flip side of that is it's the algorithms and people are going to filter that for us. And here's another example. We asked in the same study, how many times in general do you need to hear about something, about a specific company, to believe that information to be true? The answer is 3 to 5 times globally. 3 to 5 times. In the US and UK, 8 to 9 times. Okay? I haven't done media relations in 5 years. The world is a better place. But when I did it, I would go and I would get a nice hit in the LA Times or the Wall Street Journal or AP, and it was a good story. The story definitely earned its merit. And then I could go sit on the beach for a month. No one bothered me. It was great because the story drove results. The clients clients felt they got value. My clients' CEOs would see the story in the newspaper, which always made a big difference. The mom factor is huge in PR, and that was it. No more. Those days are gone. History. Because now we have to rain on people so much for them to know that they have to buy an umbrella. It's not like, it's different now. You have to literally deluge people, and that's going to be hard, even though we have more options. So, when we think about media, we see a 4-leaf clover. And we think about, how to utilize this as part of our programming. This is my CEO's brainchild, Richard Edelman, and it's now basically my personal obsession and mission in life, is to think about this clover and what the impact is. The consumer The end user sees this as one. They don't see this as buckets. But we think about these as 4 distinct buckets, and ideally, what companies need to do is take their subject matter experts and pull them through all 4 of these clovers, and I'll explain how to do that and what they are. But we see kind of 4 species of media. This is not perfect. There's overlap. Okay, there's journalists who tweet, so it gets very mushy very fast. As we'll talk about in the panel, there are corporations who are increasingly becoming journalists, arguably. That word might be a loaded word. But again, there's mushiness here. I'll explain what we mean. But again, this cloverleaf, though, is now a virtuous cycle for authority. If you think about how to, when I'm telling companies, if they take subject matter experts, those highly trusted people who could separate art from junk, people who are high value, and they figure out how to put them across these 4 spheres of media so that each clover works to benefit the other, that's going to help with those 8 to 9 times. That's going to help with trust, and that's going to help generate the resonance that companies need to stand out today. So let's talk about each one of these. The upper left is traditional. These are the big guys. These are the people who used the late 90s and early 2000s to build their web franchises. There's a lot of pain in that area. I mean, the New York Times is trying to transition to a paid model, but others like the LA Times that you'll hear are a huge success. So, but still, and this remains very, very powerful, not going away. I mean, we're not one to believe that social media and what we do with content is going to replace what we do with the traditional press, not by a long shot. Highly trusted, powerful reach, and we use this to, and I'm sure you knew our example because I think this is how we kind of learn is by eating our own dog food. We take our experts and we figure out how to propagate them across those channels. So I write for Ad Age, my colleagues write for Ad Week. We're in PR Week a lot. So as an organization, we do that. Traditional PR does not go away. Does not go away. But as you see, it's 1/4 of the equation. This group to me is the most interesting group out of this entire cloverleaf. So people say to me, Steve, you're interested in social media. I'm like, social media is 1/4 of what I think about. I'm thinking about media, and I'm particularly thinking about this upper right-hand quadrant we call TRADIGITAL, which is a mix. It's a hybrid of traditional and digital outlets. What are they? Typically, they are blog-based media. They don't have to be, but they're blog-based media that were digitally born and bred, have no legacy whatsoever, not tied to major holding companies. They can be niche-focused, but they also can be horizontal. So I think that the Huffington Post was a great example of that. They were horizontal. They are open to a lot of different contributors. They do innovative things in terms of editorial and advertising integration. They still maintain Chinese walls, but the Chinese wall is mushy. It's fungible, and they typically cover niche and they're global. So whether it be the Sheet or the Wrap, or the Daily Beast, or Gawker, or Sports Blog Nation, or GigaOM, or TechCrunch. There's millions of them. There's lots of those sites out there. To me, these are mini media companies that have a sales force, they sell advertising, but they could be 2, 3, 4-person shops. They're different than just the Joe Blogger who's one person who's doing this kind of as a side job. A little different than that. This area, to me, this category is interesting. Why? Powerful. They have a higher resonance in social media than the traditional guys do. They get more tweets per story than the traditional guys. They have a bigger impact on SEO and search than some of the traditional guys do. So this group, to me, and eventually, they graduate. So the Huffington Post, to me, now has moved over. They're graduated. They got bought by a conglomerate. They're on the other side. The Daily Beast merging with Newsweek, I'm not quite sure where they are. I mean, that was kind of one going the other way. And again, we have these gray areas, and it's a Venn diagram for a reason, because that's where we can say, we're sort of right here. We don't have to say we're right. But this is a very powerful part of the cloverleaf, and I think it's overlooked by a lot of people. Bottom left, owned media. Our CEO has said, quoting Andy Hayward, former chief of CBS, that every company can be a media company. We fundamentally believe that. We have a chief content officer who joined us from the British Broadcasting Company, who worked there for 30 years, and we are helping our clients create content. Owned content can be websites and blogs, but it also can be iPhone applications and Android and BlackBerry apps. It could be unique microsites. You could argue that events are owned media. But we believe that every company could be a media company, and we're helping our clients create content with the help, often, of externalists. And that's new for PR. That's new for PR. We're teaching our people how to be adept in storytelling. So this area is a unique way, and you'll hear during the panel of some examples where it's a direct, from media, from owned media direct to traditional. It's a direct shot sometimes. And then the bottom right is the part that everyone wants to talk about, but I urge you not to lose sight of the bigger picture. I mean, believe me, I go everywhere I go, people want to know, Steve, what's Twitter going to do next? What's happening to Facebook? What's the next thing? I want to know what the next thing is. There will be a next thing. There'll be many. But it's one part. It's one part. So, let's not focus just on the wheel of the car. Let's think about the whole car. But there's no doubt that this remains extremely powerful. But to me, what you do is you take authority and you pull it across these four. And we call that transmedia storytelling. Now, that's a word that other people are using in different ways in the Hollywood community. But it's the same concept. It's about how a story manifests itself, often in a disconnected way, across different kinds of media. So the opportunity, and this isn't just for PR, it's an opportunity for anybody who's sitting in that cloverleaf. The opportunity is there for the traditional guys too, is to propagate new ideas across the cloverleaf. Be the thought leaders. Become the sources of authority on a given topic, because that will help you build resonance and trust in this new age where there's too much content and not enough time. So I want to give you 5 steps for success, 5 things to think about. First, really simple. Elevate experts. I go to some different clients of ours, and they say, Steve, we don't have experts. And I'm like, no, you have tons of them. And I said, if I went and I sat in your server room and I monitored everybody's sent mail, I would just find unbelievable content and things that you're sharing every day inside this company. Doesn't matter how big you are. There's experts inside every company. Otherwise, they wouldn't be companies. They're paid for some premium because they have some intellectual property. Figure out who are the cadre of experts in an organization. If it's a 5-person organization or a 5,000 or 50,000, there are experts across. If you don't have them, you also can kind of think about how you curate ones that are external experts and bring them onto your site. You could do that. It's not as powerful, I think, as bringing your own folks in. And teach those people how to engage in meaningful conversations. Show them how to be part of the cloverleaf. Have them be interviewed by the press. Have them write bylines for those tradigital outlets or blogs. I mean, we have people who write for Business Insider or Mashable because we have content. They want content. Show them how to use Twitter and Facebook, but make that a virtuous cycle. Make that a virtuous cycle with those experts in the middle. Example: Cisco's doing that in a nice way. They're bringing their own internal experts, as well as outsiders, to engage in a conversation about the future of connectivity and the video revolution. And they're using that, and they're doing that through owned media, through their owned media. But if you notice in the upper right, they got buttons to share on Facebook and Twitter, and you can follow that all the way through. So this is just an example of how companies are going direct now with their own message. Curation, I think, is a huge trend overlooked by a lot of people. starting to catch some steam. This is the age of the digital curator. There's a market for people who can separate art from junk. My finger paintings are not in the Los Angeles, County Museum. They're not there. But there are great works of art there. I don't know. You could tell me what's there. I don't even know. It's across from our office, and it's right across Metal in L.A. And I go there, 6, 7, 8 times a year, and I never go in. Again, there's a market for people who can separate art from junk. Curators are big. When you go to an exhibition in a museum, they didn't just buy the stuff or get it on loan and just plop it around. They made a decision about how to package it, how to present it, the lighting, the ambiance, the music, the displays. I mean, they thought about the experience you have. And I think that's the same thing online. You can separate art from junk in a niche that you know a lot about, because there will be a market for that. And so it also allows you to editorialize and contextualize content too. The best blogs, if you think about it, are curational. Twitter, some of the best people and the most interesting people to follow beyond Charlie Sheen, there's things beyond Charlie Sheen that are, they're curational. They're finding links. I mean, links are huge on Twitter, huge. Here's an example. We built this site for Qualcomm just down the road. And, they were at a trade show. They were going to this big mobile show called Mobile World Congress. It's in Barcelona. And we built them this, pretty rapidly, this site where they are curating content about the trade show in one place. They have their content, they have industry news, all in one place. They are curating to connect. Smart. 3, dazzle with data. So people online do not read. They spend 20 seconds or less on a web page before they move on. They tend to read 20% of a web page before they move on. The greatest invention of the 21st century is the bullet point. If you notice now, if you go on a lot of news sites, they will have the bullet points right at the very top of the story. They tell you the 3 things you got to know, and that's it. CNN does that on every story. They say, okay, here's the 3 things you got to know. Barry Bonds was convicted of 1 charge, do this and that, all of my life. I know what I need to know. We also, though, we've seen people like visuals, video and data visualizations. They play with them. They spend time looking at them. The Nielsen-Norman group, which is a group that looks at web usability, which is how people use websites, they found that people can smell stock photography a mile away. If they go on a website and they see stock photography, they know it. They've seen it. They've seen the pictures. They know that the dude was on the bank site and he was on the on the police site. They're able to kind of put that together. But images of real people, they spend a lot of time with. Images of employees, by the way. And also data, infographics work. I mean, USA Today figured it out 30 years ago, right? That hasn't gone away. It's just worse than ever. And so infographics and visuals and video really, really do help a lot. So package up data. You could have your own data, or you can just go find data that's out there and present it in a compelling way, in a story. On the right was a little infographic that we did just for fun. But I like what these guys are doing at this company called Get Satisfaction, small startup. They actually have an infographic designer on staff. It's part of his job. And he makes these little doodles, once or twice a week. And he puts them up, and they did inside the mind of a community manager, and they just did this. And this stuff is niche. It's of interest to a certain group of people, but it spreads like wildfire. And you know where it starts? It starts on that tradigital group. They run these verbatim, and then they get socialized on Twitter, and then eventually some of the big guys will pick it up. Owned can drive, earned can drive social, and then back to earned. Virtuous cycle. Data helps convey thought leadership. Even though people maintain a cursory knowledge about a lot of things, they do want to go deep into certain topics. There are certain things people want to go deep into. I mean, for me, I'm sorry you're going to hate me, but I'm a Yankee fan. And so, Are you from New York? Yes. Excellent. I have to take you with me on the road. Because when I go to certain cities, that doesn't go over well. Thankfully, and by the way, Edelman does not have an office in Boston, and it's probably for a reason. So, anybody here from Boston? I hope not. Okay. Sorry. So, okay, well, anyway, I have to know a lot about the Yankees. Are they winning? Yeah. Good, okay. So, so I will go deep into that topic. I will go and I'll follow the beat writers. I will go and I'll follow the players on Twitter. And it's true in any kind of context. And if you have publications, if you have things that you're publishing, white papers, especially in B2B, white papers, PowerPoints, people want to go into that stuff. So even though we have this cursory knowledge about a few things, when we want to know a lot about something, we go deep. And increasingly, people want to read. There's a site called longreads.com that's dedicated to people who are writing New Yorker types of articles. We like sites like Scribd and SlideShare. Scribd is literally a social network for PDF documents. That sounds crazy, but they're growing like crazy. SlideShare is a social network for people who like PowerPoint. They don't necessarily like to make PowerPoint, but they like to consume interesting PowerPoints. And I can tell you that when that community is active. So when they want to go deep, they will go deep. And the iPad and the tablets are going to make this happen more. We've seen that people are reading stories at night that they don't have time to read. There was a study done by a company called Read It Later, which is a little application that you can use to save content that you want to read later. And they found out that people were using their application mostly at night while they're watching TV. So they're reading content, they're tweeting about it while they're consuming other media, but they're looking for long-form content in things they care about. In things they care about. And then finally, we know for years now, the media is trolling the social platforms, and also this digital group that they're keeping an eye on. They're concerned about that because they're pretty disruptive, and they're looking for experts. They're asking questions. They're trying to find quotable experts. They're pulling stories, that are right. Tweets on Twitter have made the news as the news many, many times. And so we are recommending that companies think about taking their experts and putting them out there to ask and answer questions. In an ideal scenario, social media should not just be 100% of one person's job. It should be 1% of 100 people's job. And that's an ideal scenario. Somewhere in the middle is a happy medium. But that is the reality. That helps you build surface area, and answering questions helps, again, in this virtuous cycle I talked about earlier. Because the media is asking, if it's on the internet, does it make it quotable? And the answer is increasingly yes, which means that other people will get quoted if they are there and you're not. So that's what I want to talk to you about today is like this new era. We went from the era of commercialization to democratization, and those continue, but they're not the dominant trend anymore. We're now in this new era of validation, and the media cloverleaf is where that happens, and thought leadership through those different tactics are the way you bring that to life. Now I'm talking from a PR context. There's no reason why the media won't do the same thing for journalists. And that's why I think it's really interesting that we're seeing this kind of blending. We're seeing PR people act like journalists. We're seeing journalists now become promotional. What's interesting is that I just read before I came here today that one of the top writers at Mashable went to Facebook, and his job is to help journalists use Facebook better for reporting and story gathering. That's his job. Tumblr has a gentleman who left Newsweek to basically become their ambassador to the media community. So this is all getting very mushy. But the reality now is that this has to be turned into a virtuous cycle, and I believe expertise is the way to do that. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Steve. That was certainly a great stage setter for the panel that we're about to have. And let's bring up the panel. Let me introduce you to our panelists. First, we're really proud to have Jeff Boucher for the LA Times. Anybody follow Jeff on the Times, in the Times, online? Rock star, come on up here, pull up a chair. Jeff is a feature writer for the LA Times, covering pop culture, music, and Hollywood for the calendar section in LATimes.com. As the media company's self-described go-to geek, Boucher also helms the pop. This is in your bio.
Yeah, I know.
You know, it's like I'm only reporting. He also helms the popular Hero Complex blog, which reports on the intersection between Hollywood and comic books, sci-fi, and fantasy. It sounds like my life. Hero Complex was named Best Blog on a Large Media Website in 2010 by the Online News Association, and to the Best New Brand list in Ad Age. Jeff, it's great to have you. Thank you.
Thanks.
I want to read the story about the monkey.
How about the monkey? That's from the new Planet of the Apes movie. There's a zombie. We got Scream. I mean, it's everything that matters, really.
Anything
Really,
but
yeah.
It's everything that matters.
And
So
you
I'm
heard
not-
it here
no,
first
I
at
go deep
USC
in
Annenberg.
monkeys. I just want to let you know everything about
Let's see. Jeff has been. May I, please?
Please.
Got to get control of this thing. Jeff has been with the Times since 1991 and has previously written on crime, local politics, and transportation issues. He was part of the paper's campaign trail coverage team during the 2000 presidential election, which included a stint aboard Air Force Two, not Air Force One.
Well, Al Gore was running, so.
Okay, yeah. His work has appeared in more than 60 newspapers in 10 countries, as well as respected publications such as Smithsonian Magazine. He's the author of a 1997 book, Two Badges, The Lives of Mona Ruiz, a biography of a former gang member who became a police officer. His work was selected the Best American Music Writing of 2004, and again for the 2006 edition in the Da Capo Press series. Boucher also wrote the popular music entry for World Book Encyclopedia's 2006 yearbook edition.
They never
Jeff.
paid. I'm still waiting for the check.
Welcome, Jeff. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
And next we have Joel Bellman. Joel is press deputy to Los Angeles County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. And we've been saying that Joel is the curator of Zev's blog, and he actually informed me just a short time ago that he's not, but he just knows enough to be dangerous. So we'll look forward to hearing about that. In Zev's office, Joel is responsible for all aspects of media relations, including issues research, media strategy, and general writing assignments, working with other deputies in a variety of policy areas. His duties include preparing agenda materials and monitoring weekly board meetings. Prior to joining Supervisor Yaroslavsky's staff, he served for 5 years in a similar capacity for then 3rd District Supervisor Ed Edelman, following nearly a decade in radio and print journalism in Los Angeles as an editorial writer, columnist, and documentary producer. He holds an MA in broadcast journalism from the University of Southern California. Fight on. And BS in Communications Arts from Cal State Poly University in Pomona. Welcome. Thanks very much for being here tonight. And finally, I'm very happy to introduce the person who I proudly get to call my boss, Geneva Overholser, Director of the USC Annenberg School of Journalism. Before coming to USC about 2 years ago, Geneva held the Curtis B. Hurley Chair in Public Affairs Reporting for the Missouri School of Journalism. Any Mizzou folks out there? Few. Where she was based in the school's Washington Bureau. She was editor of the Des Moines Register from 1988 to 1995, where she led the paper to a Pulitzer Prize for Public Service. While at the Register, she also earned recognition as Editor of the Year by the National Press Foundation and was named the Best in the Business by American Journalism Review. She's been an ombudsman for the Washington Post, a member of the editorial board of the New York Times, a syndicated columnist for the Washington Post Writers Group, and a reporter for the Colorado Springs Sun. She's been a columnist for the Columbia Journalism Review and frequent contributor to Poynter.org. She's also spent 5 years overseas working and writing in Paris and Kinshasa. Interesting comparison there, Paris and Kinshasa. Through the Annenberg Public Policy Center in 2006, she published a manifesto on the future of journalism titled On Behalf of Journalism, a Manifesto for Change. She's also co-editor with Kathleen Hall Jamieson of the volume The Press, part of the Oxford University Press Institutions of American Democracy series. Wait, there's a little more. She serves on the boards of the Center for Public Integrity, the Committee of Concerned Journalists, the John S. Knight Fellowships at Stanford University, the Fund for Independence in Journalism, and the Academy of American Poets, and on the American Advisory Committee of the Knight Foundation. She was for 9 years a member in her spare time, 9 years a member of the Pulitzer Prize Board, the final year as chair, and is a former officer of the American Society of Newspaper Editors. And finally, she has a daughter who spent quite a number of years in the public relations field. So, Geneva, it's great to have you here. Now, we've asked each of our panelists to start things off with 5-6 minutes of commentary on their observations about the kind of work they're doing and so forth. And so let's do that, and then we'll get into Q&A and discussion. Jeff, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. I started at the LA Times, as you said, back in 1991. I was 21 years old. It'll be 20 years this summer, and I'm coming up on 3,000 stories published, all of which qualifies me as old media, every sense of the word, old media. But my career took a real detour, and an unexpected detour in around 2007. At that time, I was covering rock and roll for the paper. After covering crime and gangs and politics, I decided to have some fun. And I was going on tour with Springsteen, going on tour with the Stones. It made me feel young, and it was a lot of fun. But at that time, Comic-Con down in San Diego, Comic-Con International, was really starting to percolate in a different way. Now, Comic-Con, for folks that, well, everybody knows what it is now, but I mean, it started off as some guys selling comic books in the basement of a hotel back in 1971, and now it's become this megaphone for popular culture. In 2007, it wasn't quite what it is now, but it was getting bigger, and my bosses knew that, despite having a wife and a haircut, that I grew up collecting comic books. I was a science fiction guy. I'm, the biggest Star Wars nerd ever. 9,000 comic books. I mean, seriously, come on, really. And they were aware of my dark secret. So they asked me to be sort of an ambassador, I guess, to write about these things every once in a while. And I enjoyed it so much that I started a blog for the paper. And it was called Hero Complex. And the first month, I think we had 2,000 hits. Last month, it had 1.5 million. So it's become this huge thing for the Times. And the Times, I have to give them a lot of credit. I'm very proud to work there. It's actually a great honor in my life in many ways to write for a living and to write for a paper or a publication or a website like the Los Angeles Times. And I don't really consider it old media, considering we had 196 million hits on the website in March. LosAngelesTimes.com has become a real vibrant and vigorous and essential thing on the internet. And they saw that my Hero Complex, a little part of the website, was bringing in a different audience than that we had before. Unlike the Laker blog, which was bringing in sports fans who were already reading us, or maybe the food section blog, which was bringing in subscribers who cared about our criticism and our recipes and such, that this was a new constituency. And it's a very passionate group of people that care about Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and Iron Man and all this. And they smell tourism. If you're a tourist, they know. So you have to have the musk of the nerd on you. And I possess it. And so I started writing about these things. And it's interesting, too, because a lot of the logic that people said about what would work, I just ignored, because they said, well, keep the stories short. Everything needs to be short. And I said, no, these people, if you're writing about, Severus Snape, they want everything. There's never enough. And I would write these really, really long pieces. Now, what's interesting is that PR professionals in Hollywood, last month I won the award for Journalist of the Year for all of show business. And it's because of the Hero Complex and the LA Times, because what it's turned into, I'll give you an example. Before Alice in Wonderland came out, the Tim Burton film, the 3D film that was the second biggest movie of the year in its release, we did a 30-day countdown. We did a story a day on the Hero Complex about the film. We interviewed every cast member, and sometimes they were short, sometimes they were long, sometimes they were photos. But one thing we did is we introduced every character and interviewed the actor that played each one. So this is what we call fishing with nets on the internet. Instead of doing one story, we did 30 short ones, and they each connect to the other. And by the end of it, you've created this small library of dedicated content that people want to go through. And this readership, again, they don't want to just go wide, they want to go deep. There's never enough. So we had people reading all those things. And then the LA Times print edition having enjoyed all this great success online, took that and ran all 30, well, it wasn't all 30, I take it back, it was about 15 of them, on a single page with color photos in the Sunday calendar section on the week before release. So now you're deep sea fishing with one big hook. The studio, Warner Brothers, they went nuts. I mean, it was like the best thing they could possibly hope for because it had the credibility of landing on the doorstep of Hollywood. Our print edition still has a very vibrant and established readership, and they covet that. And all of it has the air of credibility. It has the ring of truth. I tell people, judge us by our worst day, not our best. And our worst day, we deliver credibility, access, insight, sparkling writing that doesn't exist.
Modesty and humility.
No, we haven't got there yet. But it's not a ragged affair, and everything turns out good. And there's built-in skepticism too. We did a similar countdown for Avatar, and the first day of the countdown was, "Will this be Delgo?" Which I don't know if you guys know what Delgo is. You probably don't, but it was a terrible animated film. And they called up, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, we don't work for you. This is what we do. You're going to get all of it." And it's just been a very, very interesting ride. Considering all the things I've done in the paper, like I said, coming up on 3,000 stories published, and I did this big story last week on Arnold Schwarzenegger, ran on the front page about his Hollywood future and such. So I still get to do a lot of the big stuff for the print edition that doesn't go on the blog. And one of the things I got to do was go to interview Leonard Cohen in New York last year, which was very, very exciting for me. It's like one of my dreams to interview him. I did this big, long piece, and we ran a letter in the paper. Why'd you let the comic book guy go? Why did you let Leonard Cohen get interviewed by the comic book guy? So it's interesting. People don't remember everything they've done. They just remember the most recent thing, and now I'm that guy. But it was interesting listening to you speak about the Venn diagram, and I'm not really sure exactly where I am on that Venn diagram.
All of it.
Well, there you go. But it's been a very interesting ride, and I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say and being part of this. So thanks for having me.
Thanks. And so, Joel, tell us about what happens in your shop and how things have changed.
Okay, well, first of all, let me say I'm delighted to be invited to do this and flattered to be asked, and it's always nice to come back on campus. As Jerry mentioned, I got my master's in broadcast journalism, and I kind of had my heart set on working in radio news, and I did that for a while. I never really planned to migrate over to the PR side in politics or anything else. But as I was saying earlier, I'm very glad I was never one of those journalism students who trashed the PR people in the sequence, because every PR person in town, whether or not I went to school with them, would have reminded me every living day, and the last 22 years would have been a screaming hell for me. But I've enjoyed it over here, and it's sort of odd to think that I've actually been doing this twice as long as I was in journalism, because I still kind of think of myself as an accidental tourist. I worked for a couple of radio stations for 7 years, and then the news department disappeared and my job with it, and I was picked up by the Herald Examiner. Some of you may remember, or have heard about it anyway, in the mists of legend. I worked there for the last 3 years that they were published, and we kind of thought of them as the canary in the coal mine for the new media. They were the distant second week daily newspaper compared to the LA Times, and the recession of 89, 92, which was the aerospace build down after the Cold War ended, wiped them out. And as I was cleaning out my desk, I got a call from somebody representing Supervisor Edelman asking if I'd ever thought about moving over to that side. I still fancied myself as a potential hire at the LA Times, and that's what I was trying for at the time. But they were going through an upheaval on the editorial page, and therefore there were no positions. So I took a deep breath and jumped off into PR land working in politics, and I've done that for 22 years, and it's been a very interesting experience watching the media maelstrom. The business has changed in innumerable ways since I was in it, and when people ask me if I miss it, yeah, I kind of miss some ways what it was 20, 25 years ago, but it's not that now, and it's not going to be that in a few years. There's a saying that no man can ever step in the same river twice, because he's not the same man and it's not the same river. And that's really what this job is like. The technology has changed completely, but my basic job and my basic goals on Zev's behalf as a county supervisor and Supervisor Ed Edelman, his predecessor, who I worked for 5 years, same thing. They're elected officials. They've got constituents who elect them, who they need to serve. They need to tell the public about what they're doing. Public wants to know. Public needs to feel that we're accessible. Public wants things from us. We have to be able to deliver them, whether it's information or services or attention. And we deal with this every week in the Board of Supervisors meeting. My personal constituency are the media representatives. I don't deal with the general public that much, and I often say, for Zeb's sake, it's a good thing. Because sometimes I think this would be a great job if only it weren't for the constituents. But then I have to kind of remember, well, yeah, we are kind of supposed to focus on them. But my constituency are the media folks, and I was saying to somebody earlier, that to me has always been one of the most fun parts of this job. I respect and honor and admire journalists and journalism. It's what my heart was set on doing, and they fulfill a very important, and I would say without blushing, a very noble function. And it's never more important than in times of upheaval and social change, as we're seeing in other parts of the world. And it's been heartbreaking to see the destructive aspects of the media evolution over the last few years. I happen to think a lot of good things have come out of it and will continue to come out of it. But capitalism is creative destruction. There were a lot of things that have been destroyed and damaged that haven't really been repaired or replaced in this new media environment. I think it's beginning to come back in some respects, and I look forward to that. But my relationship with reporters and Zev's office's relationship with the media world is what it always was. What's changed is the roster of communication channels and the technology. But it's still basically about being accessible, explaining what we're doing, answering for the bad stuff, putting out a message about either what we're doing or what we want people to know about or care about, or mobilizing political support for this or that initiative, whether it's for the more controversial of a couple of transit routes, or whether it's support for a revenue measure, or whether it's opposition to some state or national legislation that we think is going to do a lot of damage to LA County, and we have to get that message out. It's all the same thing. I mean, what's changed is the way I get the message out. I'm not going to talk about Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff, but those are all tools that we have to use increasingly to augment and eventually to supersede the old methods of gathering information, mailing out a press release. Then we would fax it, then we would email it, now we tweet it. I don't know what we're going to be doing in a few years, but all these things are designed to get our message out more effectively and more targeted. Instead of a piece of paper landing on a Metro desk where it may or may not get opened, it's going to land on the Twitter page of the reporter that I want to reach and pay attention to what we're doing. And the nice thing is, they understand that they need to know what we're doing just as much as I understand that I need them to know. So they're receptive to hearing from us. I'm receptive to communicating with them and putting out information and being available. And these tools are what make it possible to do that. And the bottom line with what I do now and what I did when I was a journalist and what I trained to do is exactly the same thing. There's no air between the kind of person I needed to be there and the kind of person I strive to be now. And that is somebody who's truthful, who doesn't mislead reporters, who's accessible, who's accountable, who will represent my position effectively, whether it's my newspaper or my column or my elected boss, and basically serve the constituents as honorably and effectively as Jeff and his colleagues in the old and new media and tradigital media try to serve their audience and their readers and their viewers. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. And so now, Geneva, we've talked a lot about the shifts that are taking place in media, the changes that are taking place in the relationships between public relations and journalism. I was talking with somebody before this session about how it's really interesting that when you think about the history of public relations, it started really as part of the journalism field. Most early public relations people were journalists. And then for a period of time, it kind of drifted away into its own world, and it exists as a special, very important profession. But now we see it drifting back again. And we see those original traits of journalism becoming, as we were talking earlier about content production and so forth, it's becoming more important again. What's your take on all that?
Well, as you can imagine, it's an extremely interesting topic to me, having the pleasure of running a journalism school, which is about 40% public relations students, undergrad, and about half strategic public relations in our master's two-year program. So, trying to think about what is logical about having a school that is called a journalism school and then has this very significant chunk that is public relations, and many of our most talented students. So, of course, I've gotten to know much more about what is driving the students who are seeking to do public relations since I've been here and been interviewing the kinds of people who are coming here, the remarkable scholarship candidates I just interviewed a couple of weeks ago, listening to them about what it is they want to do in their lives. So I kind of start with the things, common traits among journalism and public relations professionals, which are obvious to many of us. I mean, we all need to be good writers, good communicators, critical thinkers. All of us think about transmitting a message of some kind to the public. We're experiencing a lot of the same things, obviously, in the changes that are occurring in each of these fields. You talked about what fast-paced changes are happening for journalism, and it's certainly true, but really fast-paced changes happening for PR as well. Certainly whenever we go and talk to people who are doing communications work of any kind in companies, all of us are affected by the changing economic underpinnings. Advertising, who the hell knows where advertising is going? We're all affected by the things that, Steve, you talked about so interestingly. The different ways that people are consuming information, but also the ways that they're creating information and co-creating information. I, as another longtime journalist, as Jerry made unmistakably clear with his endless recitation of my professional life.
It's almost annual review time.
That's right. I obviously come from a very traditional newspaper world, but I am endlessly excited about the opportunities for journalism today. And one reason, and maybe it's appropriate for me to say this not to be too pointed, guys, but as the only non-white guy on the panel, and awfully white, I'm representing a lot of the world that hasn't been as well served by even, the golden age of traditional journalism. We are now part of an opportunity, at least, to be much more democratic and to engage the public in all kinds of ways. A lot of the promise remains to be seen, but a lot of it is happening, and our students across public relations and journalism really burn with the same kind of thing I burned with back in the day when I went to Medill and got my master's, and that was to go out there and serve the public's information needs. So there are lots of things that cross the lines of these professions. There obviously are certain things that are different. I mean, a lot of it is about whom you serve, right? And of course, there are all kinds of different public relations, and there are all kinds of different ways of doing journalism. So to me, it's no longer well, here's journalism and here's public relations, and these people are not advocates and these people are. But I would say if we do try to identify some bright lines, one is for journalists, I think it is still fair to say that independence is a key ethic. Independence without fear or favor. That is, you're serving the public. The public is your master, the public interest. I'm not saying everybody does this perfectly, au contraire, certainly not true, but the goal is to serve the public interest and not the interest of your employer or your the government, the corporation, or whomever. Whereas, of course, if you're doing public relations, presumably there is another stakeholder whose values you honor, whom you're trying to serve. So, I mean, that's kind of one of the differences. That doesn't mean that either is more honorable. I do think it's perhaps one of the remaining distinctions, but that would be an interesting thing for us to talk about. I'm struck by how many of our remarkably gifted public relations students are going into public relations after having fallen in love with journalism because they want to be able to advocate for something they care deeply about. So they may be, I had a wonderful conversation with a young woman who is probably in the audience, who is very much interested in environmental causes. I think our school is uniquely well situated to help people advocate on behalf of public information because it's situated in such a fine journalism school. I mean, I think this is one of the felicitous facts of our having these two fields together. That doesn't mean it isn't honorable to advocate on behalf of corporate goals and aims. Clearly it is. I mean, it's a different intention. So it seems to me that if we try to sort of say, well, is this journalism or is this public relations? It is much less clear today than it used to be because all of us are redefining the ways we connect with people. All of us are redefining the ways we can succeed. I mean, back in the day when I went into journalism, it was anathema even to talk about, how many readers you had or how in the hell you were going to sustain the work you did. You threw it over the wall, you let some other schlemiel worry about that. It wasn't your problem, right? And that wasn't all to the good. I mean, we like to believe that wall, that sacred wall, kept us clean and pure and unbesmirched. But it also meant we often didn't give a damn how many people read us. We joked in the newsroom about these eye-burner, prize-winning things that, well, nobody read it, but by God, it won the whatever prize. And we should be caring about whether or not we're actually reaching people. Does that mean we're holding a finger to the wind, and all of our purpose in serving the public's information and what it needs to know is gone? No, but it does mean that we have a better sense of whether or not we're actually connecting with people. Does that mean we're becoming shills for, are we becoming, shills for ourselves? I think all of these questions are out there and very interesting ones for us to talk about.
Great, great. Steve used a lot of terms that historically might have applied to journalism. Talk about authority, authenticity, media companies, content, digital curation, transmedia storytelling. All of this, I think, says a lot about the way the disciplines are evolving.
Or as he said, this has all gotten very mushy.
It's gotten mushy. Very well put. It's gotten this mushiness thing. We have to have a course on mushiness, I think. But then this
in New York we say mushy. But that's
mushy.
Okay.
Mushy.
All right. And in Boston we say go Red Sox. But aside from that,
not this year.
It's early.
Every year.
Aside from that, seriously, at a time when PR people are talking about authenticity and we're talking about direct communication with our stakeholders, having direct access, not relying on third parties, the media, traditional media, what kinds of responsibilities come with that? What kinds of ethical and moral responsibilities come with that access when there is no intermediary? What do you think?
If I may, let me try to deal with this first, because we kind of confronted this when we made the decision to completely revamp our webpage a few years ago and junk the old model, which I had been writing 100% of the content of, and it was static and not graphically good, and I'd been after Zev for years to hire some outside firm to completely redo it. But it's a very expensive, time-consuming process, and when we finally committed to do it, we ended up with an annual budget of several $100,000 and a staff of about 6 full or part-time people producing the thing, and still it's a push. So it's a big, big project. But one of the reasons we were doing it was because we realized we were losing the county press corps and losing a sort of press contingent that was interested in what we were doing So the public wasn't getting informed, and we were losing, our ability to communicate. And the flip side was the public, although they didn't really realize it, were losing a very important institution that would hold the government accountable by asking the hard questions and sort of watching us day in and day out what we were doing. And when we decided to create this new website, there was, and to some extent still is, some tension about what kind of entity it really is supposed to be. And while it's undeniably part of our overall communication effort, which means it's not going to, rip the lid off some dreadful career-threatening scandal that Zev might be involved in, we're not going to pull punches and sort of soft pedal everything and whitewash everything and treat it like a sort of dazzling online press release. The principal writers who produce it are all former LA Times and, interestingly, also former Herald Examiner writers who are all trained journalists who spent years in the business developing their credibility on that side. And we all agreed that if this thing is going to have any utility at all for Zev or the public, we essentially have to apply journalistic standards to what we put out. Now, it's paid for by Zev, which means the public, on behalf of his office. Nobody deludes himself that this is an independent entity that answers to nobody. It ultimately does answer to Zev. But when the project was conceived, everybody agreed that the only way it would work and the only way these journalists agreed to work on it was if we treated it with integrity and seriousness, and it didn't just become a propaganda megaphone for us. And we've developed a kind of interesting relationship with the outside press. Sometimes they use us as a tip sheet. Sometimes they link to us. Sometimes they will write a piece that takes a very different position from the newsy item that we have on the website. But it's become another media element in what we do, not just another element in the Zev communication effort, but actually another media entity like the Times, like Curbed LA, like Neon Tommy, like LA Observed, like the KPCC website, which has video content as well as print content, not just audio sound files. And everybody's kind of becoming multimedia, and in that environment, we cannot be seen as just the Zev propaganda piece. We've got to have independent credibility, understanding what the context is, and I think that's the only way a kind of hybrid publication like we do is going to survive in this environment.
So it's kind of a practice of journalism, but within organizational goals.
Absolutely, and it's got to have the same standards of accuracy, fairness. If there's a negative aspect to a story, we're going to include that. We're not going to shy away from the story or downplay that aspect. Mm-hmm. And that's what Zev signed on for. And there's been some tension sometimes between the web team and other parts of the office, because not all the deputies, and I love them and they are honest and have integrity and seriousness to a person, but they do not have a journalistic orientation like we do. And these journalists who do the web thing are more recent transplants than I was. Most of them just made the change over the last few years. So they had more years in the business than I did, and a kind of deeper, ingrained, instinctive embrace of those values. And some of the other deputies, frankly, were not entirely comfortable with stuff that may not have been 100% positive, or may have talked about some project that was a little troubled, behind budget, or over budget, behind schedule, or controversial for one way or another. The deputies would have preferred not that we write a smiley face piece, but just let it go. Like, we got plenty of other stuff to cover. Why do we have to cover that? And we had some pretty vigorous internal debates about it. And I think with few exceptions, the web team won, because they basically went to Zev and said, look, your credibility is on the line here. We can't pull our punches because we're going to be done as an entity.
Steve, how are you seeing that playing out on the corporate side?
Well, I mean, we're not going to be as balanced as journalists. I mean, that's just the reality. We have an agenda, and but I think if you provide some balance, the more balance you can provide, the more credible you'll be. There's no doubt about that. But I think that, we we don't go fully that way for a lot of clients because it's just they can't get there yet. They can't get there. I think that's going to be part of a process.
What's been the best case that you've seen?
Well, I mean, I think years ago, Walmart had a site called Walmart Facts, where they kind of put out facts about different sides, different perspectives in one place. So I haven't seen a lot of companies really kind of do where they present both sides of an argument because they're afraid to on their own domain. The lawyers don't want them to do yet. Yeah. And on Twitter, they only do that if they're pulled in. I think that's just going to take a long, long time. I mean, I wonder, in your case, what happens when Zev goes up for re-election? Because then he's got an agenda, and that might overlap with the public interest, but it may not.
One of the interesting things I discovered early on about Zev when I was covering him as a journalist and editorial writer, and I've known him for about 30 years, the first, 13 years before I worked for him, he was just one more elected official, and I dealt with him when I was at the radio station, when I was on the Herald editorial board. He came in and asked for our endorsement, so it's interesting to have been in that position where he came in asking for something and now I report to him. It's sort of funny the way the wheel turns, but one thing that always impressed me about him, which is true now and was true then, he always kept a very firm Chinese wall between the campaign stuff and questions about the campaign and the campaign financing and that stuff and the governing part of his job. I am on the governing side. So during the campaigns, the re-election campaigns that he undertook, since I've been on his staff, I had virtually nothing to do with all that campaign stuff. There is some unavoidable overlap where he's out at some campaign event in a kind of official capacity and then people call me later, but things about the campaign and about his opponents and the financing.
Doesn't the constituent see it as one?
I'm sorry?
The constituent, though, sees it as one.
Actually, they don't, because he would have a different spokesperson, and our practice, the practice of my predecessors when they worked for him at the city, and my practice now is if there are campaign-related questions, I hand those off right away, so there is no confusion. Okay. I am the government guy. I work for the county. I talk about his role as an elected official and what's going on in county policy, and the business of getting reelected, which is necessary. That's the campaign team. So there really isn't any confusion.
So you have a kind of Chinese wall to use it.
Yeah, but look, I do think the public isn't in on all of these things all the time, and that this changing landscape can be confusing for the public. I mean, with all due respect for the way you all are handling it, and I remember, as I said, when Zev Yaroslavsky was talking about nobody's covering transportation, I completely believe that this kind of thing is enriching the flow for public information needs being met. I think this is true of, a website that is run by union folks or a foundation a health journalism reporting thing that's funded by a foundation and all these other things. But I still think it's dicey is the wrong word, but we have an emerging landscape in which the public doesn't always know what to think. I think transparency is absolutely fundamental. Complete transparency about funding, intent, who's the board, all of that is really good, but still the public is often left really wondering, so is this a reporter who's reporting on the LA Kings, from the LA Times, or is this a reporter who's paid by the LA Kings? I mean, it's a landscape right now that is very fast changing, and I don't think we should assume the public always gets.
Let me just rebut that with one, I'm going to announce ahead of time, fairly impertinent comment. So apologize in advance for that. There is a real vibrant debate in our office over who actually represents the public and who's entitled to claim they serve the public. And I will just tell you now, there's a significant contingent that does not think it's journalists.
Oh, sure.
Apologies to my fellow panelists here. And the basic argument for that position is the public elected Zev, and I'm just personalizing it to Zev because I happen to work for him, but this is true, of course, of any elected official. The public put them in office. The public empowered them legally. The public expects them to serve them. Our salaries are paid by the public in a public entity, which means we are officially working for the public. And there is a view that journalists work for profit-making commercial enterprises who claim to speak for the public, but don't.
I don't consider that important at all. I think all of that is true, and it remains true that you wouldn't cover a career-threatening thing for Zev Yaroslavsky, and the public has to rely on one of those corporate-funded people to do it.
I totally. Let me just say.
I mean, I'm not saying. I think that's all really true. I think all of that is.
Let me just say, I do not take the view, in case anybody has any misconceptions about this. I do not take the view that journalists don't represent the public and that only we do. I'm on the journalist side in that
That's your
debate.
training, Sean.
Yeah, my training and my instinct. I understand, however, where my colleagues fall out on this and why they feel that. But
Right.
I was saying earlier tonight, and I'll say it again publicly, I honor and respect and revere that outside independent watchdog role the press have. Whatever form the press takes, media, all kinds of media, bloggers, whatever. It's really necessary in a democracy, and I was sorry to see wither, and I hope it comes back. So the thing is, we both represent the public in different ways. Nobody has a monopoly on representing the public. We serve the public in different ways, and there's always going to be a certain amount of tension.
Well put, and we do need to recognize too that government represents only one part of this really complicated thing that we're looking at here too. So and it's kind of a unique situation. We've got the corporate world to be thinking of, there's the NGO world, there's the media companies themselves. Looking at the work that you do, Jeff, is there, how much of your job involves thinking about how you can optimize eyeballs?
Well, that's the really interesting thing, is how you tilt what you do. And when you were talking about the wall that used to throw the content over, I remember when I first started at the paper, and you would write stuff, and car dealerships would call up, "How dare you write this story? I advertise in your paper." And we'd laugh. Yeah, well, don't. But I don't buy your cars.
Always an
Buy.
effective strategy for you advertising students out there.
Well, but we had that attitude. We had that sort of emboldened, and we were defiant about it. And the interesting thing is that back then you would only talk to the 2 or 3 readers that would call that were really angry. But now every day I have a conversation with hundreds of readers. We get comments, 150, 200 comments a day on the website. Then there's Twitter, and there's Facebook, and there's email. So there's this engagement that wasn't there before. And it's interesting to watch how it changes you, and you have to be very, very conscious of those changes and make sure that you aren't doing things just to get eyeballs. I'll have a producer come and say, "Hey, if we did like best chainmail bikini wearing comic book characters, we'll break the internet." And I'll say, "Yeah, but maybe not today. Let's do this instead." The good thing is that we work at a place where it's built in that we don't exploit, and we're not shrill, and we're not gonna go for the fast hit today. You see a lot of people, they'll pounce on the story of the day, and they'll try to just wring every hit out of it, but it's really strip mining. I think you strip mine your credibility, and I think just as you were saying, that when people look at a website and they know if it's a stock photo, they also can look at a website and they can tell, what is this voice I'm hearing, and is this a voice that is really one I want to engage with, or is this sort of, it's like pornography. I know it when I see it, and credibility is too. I know credibility when I see it.
They also know, like when the websites go and they have you go through those multiple slideshows.
Yeah.
So I don't think anyone does that better than Yahoo. Yahoo does they put up on their website on the homepage, 15
puppies.
15 puppies, and it's like please, but in some ways it's what the New York Post and the tabloids have been doing, and the
Absolutely.
British tabloids have been doing for decades.
And still are.
So we can find a balance, like just before I came here, last thing I did at the office is I put up 70 Thor comic book covers or whatever, and someone's going to read all those, click through them all, so okay, we'll get the traffic. But then we put up against that is that we still seek the interviews that other people can't get. We still do the controversial stories. We put our coverage by our beliefs, not by what is fashionable or is what's going to help us next week with the people that we cover, as far as the studios and such.
Still, it's a long way from the days when you just throw the stuff over the wall and hope for the best.
Yeah, and then, but there's also, it tilts the way, I remember there's one group of readers that came and said, look, you never write about women in this particular way, or what about this, or why don't you guys do that, or I'd really like to see this. And a lot of the things they caught us in patterns that we didn't even recognize. So there's the engagement of understanding, this person saw something I didn't see it, and owning up to it, and then talking to the reader. And a lot of times, the people that come at you the angriest, if you quickly respond and state your case, or say, "Wow, we got that wrong. We'll fix it," or maybe we'll try better. Then they become your biggest fan, or because they feel empowered by that connection.
But let me just say, the enlightenment of this response is not typical of 10 years ago or so. In the golden age of newspapers, I was ombudsman at the Washington Post, and I remember, when I would convey some more selective things that some of our readers had said, my colleagues would go, "You're listening to these people?"
That's right.
That's
right.
It was really a different
One
era.
of the differences is that you get data now instantaneously.
Right.
Instantaneously. The Huffington Post, what they do is they actually run 5 headlines on a story when it runs. They run one story with 5 headlines, and they see which one gets the most tweeted and which one does best on Google, and they make the switch back to
So this is a wholly conscious effort to maximize eyeballs.
It still starts with good content, but they're looking at the data and they're making a real-time decision. The Economist uses a tool called Social Flow, and what they do is they say, okay, we got 25 headlines in the queue today. And they will look at that and they say, well, based on the volume of Twitter and Twitter patterns, what's being talked about more, Libya or the economy? And they don't seed the stories in the Twitter based on the time or based on the news value. They seed them based on when is the best time to get Twitter pregnant.
Interesting. Why don't we go and see if we have any questions out there? How about some questions? Right here? Could you stand up, please? And we'll bring a mic to you, or we'll go over to the mic. If you have questions, we have mics over there and there. And if you would just kind of line up, all 10,000 of you.
Thank you. I'm Astrid Scheel, and I have a question, and it's kind of for all of you up there. My question is this. Plagiarism. In a tradigital, mashable world, what is it anymore? Because things get repackaged over and over, and you see it in so many different ways. I teach public relations, and I'm struggling with my students to help define it for them, because there's so much content sharing now on the web. It's really hard for them to understand what plagiarism really is.
I call it cut and paste.
Others call it research.
Anything I write, I see instantly put up on other people's website without my name on it all the time. And it's extraordinarily frustrating. There's, I think, some self-correction to that, just as we were looking at those numbers and you saw that there's a tilt back to what people consider credible and stuff. I think there's a self-correcting thing from people in websites who want to stay there, is that they get shouted down on Twitter and Facebook and stuff if they're using other people's content. And I've seen people stop and they don't get access necessarily if they're covering something here in town, from the different outlets and the people that we cover. So you kind of see that a little bit, but I mean, it's hard, it's difficult. I have to swallow hard, and I've been known to send some pretty vicious emails. We have an attorney at the Los Angeles Times named Carlene Goller. If you ever meet her, good luck to you, because you're done. Because she's tough as nails, and she has a little form letter, and stuff gets pulled down really quick. But not everybody has Carlene on their side.
I think there's the law, what the law says, and then obviously, but the problem with that is the global nature of this, right? So if somebody's in Indonesia scraping your content, good luck.
Yeah.
Then there's common law, which is kind of like, what is the community kind of, and the internet, the interwebs kind of telling us. And those aren't always the same thing. But I think what Jeff's talking about is much more the kind of the common law, which is saying, okay, people are going to kind of self-police it and watch out in general. But I mean, it's I know a friend of mine who's a blogger, and she has all of her posts scraped and posted on other websites. And for me, I said to her, she was upset, and she was like, I can't stand it. I'm going after all these. I have to she's an amateur. She's not a, she's not a professional journalist, and I go after them that my content's being reposted. I said, you should be happy. Your words are spreading, wider.
Yeah, but she could be happier if we do it the right way, which is to attribute it. I mean, there's a way to do this, right, where you actually credit people for. And I think, for example, people say, well, that's aggregation, that's not original material. Aggregation is a very thoughtful thing, as you pointed out, very useful to people, but it needs to attribute. And I really do worry a lot about this. Of course, with journalism and public relations students, it really is in flux, and I don't think we can afford for it to just look all mushy in this way. But I noticed, for example, in the recent case of the Washington Post, the woman who had plagiarized and who was, kind of given a slap on the wrist. I had a colleague at the Post years ago who did a lesser thing and was fired the next day. So it's a very interesting era. I think it's terribly important for people to understand that when they take people's content, it's not honorable if they don't attribute it. And attribution is easy to do. We should attribute. That's just sort of like you don't steal people's stuff.
Yeah, and actually, if you attribute smart people, it makes you look smarter, not dumber.
Right.
If you're smart enough to do the research and go to the right sources, it makes you smarter, right? And then you get called out if you don't do that, and you look very dumb.
And that is the hope, the calling out, as you say.
Yeah, and then also the sort of the strip mining attitude. If you do this consistently, people will realize that you're sort of a flimsy person,
Right.
and that the truth will out.
And by the way, this calling out is what will hopefully level things in this marketplace of ideas and where everybody has access. This calling out thing that works in Wikipedia and elsewhere, hopefully, is a great lever to keep things legit, let's say, to keep things honorable.
Just
Let's go over
messy
here.
along the way.
Good evening. My name is Eric Deutsch, proud Annenberg MA alumni from a time before the web, social media, even email for that matter.
You're not that old, Eric.
Clean living, Jerry. I'd love to hear your take, all of you, on content mills like demand media. That's not my question. My question is, I read a story about 6 months ago that writers, it was either Fortune or Forbes, were going to be compensated in part based on how many page views their articles get. I read last week the same thing may happen at USA Today. And the question is, what does that mean for the PR journalism relationship?
I am going to recuse myself from that question because we represent demand media.
Okay.
And I'm a consultant to the company, so I'm not going to.
Look at ethics in the new age.
But
fantastic.
that said, I'm going to listen with all ears what you guys are saying.
Anybody want to take a swing?
Well, I think it's interesting, the idea of being compensated by the number of hits and stuff. I think it's going to lead to a lot more sports writers. I think you're going to see, a tilt in things. I don't know if that could work. One of the things about journalism too is that we are responsible to write about things that we believe in and believe in institutionally and take on tough stories. I don't write just about the films that are big. I try to write about films that are great or are undiscovered as well, or comics or books or whatever and stuff like that. So I get a little nervous because then you do the puppy, 700 ways to dress your puppy, photos. So I don't know.
I read 698, but that's okay.
That's all I got.
I guess this is one of those times when I'm really glad I'm out of that end of the business, because I think I would function for about half a second if my content were being judged by how many readers I attracted or moved or whatever. I certainly take Geneva's point about the sort of arrogance and naivete and sort of irrelevance of journalists who proudly didn't care whether anybody read their stuff, because of course they're obviously not serving their readers or the public if nobody reads the stuff, and they're just getting paid to indulge their own egos. But the idea that everything, that your entire compensation base would be based on what sort of traffic you drive, I don't see how that could possibly be compatible with anything resembling the kind of journalistic mission I was raised with. We all understand that publications have to make money, and TV has to get viewers, and paid websites need to be able to attract readers that are willing to pay. But hinging the compensation levels to that kind of content, I think it's just not compatible
It just
with
seems,
news
it seems like
values.
there's a fundamental flaw there, aside from the news value issue. There's a fundamental flaw in the logic, right? Volume does not equal quality. Volume does not equal credibility. Volume does not equal effectiveness. So you might get a lot of eyeballs onto something, and it might add up to nothing.
Well, let me-
Volume equals profit, though.
Let me say this, there's an opportunity for indignation every moment in this new revolution. And you know, yesterday it was, yeah, well, there's, you know, wait around 24 hours. I mean, we're at the very beginning of this revolution, and there are going to be companies like Demand Media that that fill some kind of niche that really works profitably for a while, and maybe it'll be longer lasting. I don't think we need to go, oh my God, all the ethics are gone to hell and nobody will ever have any brains anymore because, you know, Demand Media. I think that we are seeing, and you called it validation. Other people are saying, oh, it turns out people want human beings behind the information they seek, or oh, people are seeking authority. We are in such a casting about stage, and I think the main thing we should do is really keep our eye on what the ethics are that we bring to whatever the task is, and not be too deflected by the latest cause for indignation, because there are way too many opportunities.
There's another part too that's really quickly a counterintuitive thing too, is that, you know, like I said, last month was a record month for the Los Angeles Times, and it was because of our coverage of what's happened in Japan. We also, our coverage of what's happened in the city of Bell, which would not be known to the public if it wasn't for the Los Angeles Times. Record amount of traffic and comments. Our homicide database that we created to give people concrete information about crime in Los Angeles County. These things get tremendous traffic.
Partnered with Neon Times.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in a way too, you know, I mean, everybody could have been publishing the Weekly World News at some point because of its circulation. You could argue that it made good business sense. But there's something that comes with integrity and service and thoughtfulness and the mission. And again, I think it's just like those stock photos. People know it when they see it, and people, there's a reason that those credibility numbers are changing.
Yeah, but let us agree that we don't know how the hell we're going to pay for it, and Demand Media right now is paying for it. So, I mean, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, but there's no more Weekly World News anymore.
Bad boy's upset about that.
Let's go over here for another, let's go over here for another question before the indignation gets totally out of control. Let's go over here. Are you going to ask an indignancy-generating question? Is that what
I'm building up my indignancy as we speak, or my indignation, I guess is technically the term. Thank you, Steve, for friending me up tonight on Twitter. I don't know how the hell you did it. It's a little creepy, but the fact that I found out an hour and a half later is also probably a little creepy.
Well, no, didn't you write a reply to me on Twitter?
After I found out you friended me at 6 o'clock.
Now I'm indignant.
And now we'll go over here for a question.
Could you guys take this outside?
You know, commentary?
Let me text you an answer.
That was just really a shout out. So thank you for that, and say hi to Gail and Amy
my.
Kavanaugh for me.
Oh, I just heard yesterday.
Jeff, I'm a little in awe that you're getting 200 communications from readers a day. As a former 20-year journalist myself, I'm trying to think how I would have fit that in with actually writing substantive pieces of any kind, whether it's comic books or the county government with Joel. But it leads to another question, which is Geneva, in particular, given your role as a former ombudsman, what is the role of the ombudsman in traditional publications now? I mean, because you're all kind of ombudsmen in some cases. I mean, you're dealing with this stuff and, you know, trying to preside over the reader reaction every day in volumes that ombudsmen never had to deal with 20 years ago. It's kind of an interesting, you know, where do they go? What do they do?
Yeah, but maybe that is even more reason to have an ombudsman, because it's also overwhelming. I mean, that's actually a real challenge for traditional newsrooms, because people do have to be responsive, but if they're responsive enough, they can't ever report, right? Which is not good for any of us. So I think ombudsmen, if they're operating correctly, may be more important than ever, because they really do kind of try to take on that mission. But different newsrooms, as you probably know, ombudsman differently. I mean, they may have reader representatives who are really just listening to readers, or they may do what the Washington Post does, which is ask somebody to come in and kind of apply your own judgment how well the paper is doing. So I think, You know, I think we can't have too many ways of trying to have the newspaper reflect thoughtfully about its impact on the community and how its relationships with the people formerly known as the audience are going. But very few newsrooms still have them. I mean, the LA Times doesn't have one.
We have a reader's representative.
Yeah, you have a reader's representative.
Jim Rainey.
It's not nearly as strong. Now, Jim is a totally different thing in writing about media. I mean, that's a different genre. It's valid, it's important, but it's a different genre from ombudsman.
kind of add up to something.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, the reader's representative will come to us, and I mean, there's an engagement there. It's not just them responding to the reader. There's sort of a role of being kind of an intermediary to get an answer.
I thought the position had kind of been weakened after Jamie.
I mean,
Maybe not.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's not as visible, I'll tell you that, but I still hear from our reader's representative. And,
Well, that's good.
and there's,
This raises a kind of a devil's advocate question that we could talk about for hours, and that is, again, in a world where corporations, NGOs, and other can go straight to the audience, who's the ombudsman there? Who is playing the role of the ombudsperson in situations where, and I'm speaking as a lifelong PR person, and I think we need to consider this.
I think it's the stakeholders.
You think so? Is it like self-correcting in a sense because of the power and
they'll let us know
influence of the stakeholders?
I mean, ultimately, they'll let us know, or that will become
I
exposed.
think there's a lot of truth to that.
Jerry, with all respect, I think that's an era of... the ombudsman came out of an era of centralization. Mm-hmm. It's completely decentralized now.
Yeah.
So we all are.
So again, it's the marketplace.
We all are. I mean, I agree that there will always be kind of people who are in the know more than others.
Yeah.
But I think the idea of having a centralized ombudsman now is...
Oh no, that wasn't the proposition. I agree with you.
No, but I mean, even within the media, I'm saying, it's becoming kind of that might be an impossible challenge.
Yeah.
the email address at the end of every article is the reader representative.
Makes sense.
That is definitely the most important innovation here. I think, taking up Steve's point about the ombudsman, I've always thought of ombudsman, and I've never been one, with due respect to Geneva, but reading those columns and listening to the NPR people sort of vet this or that ethical challenge for their organization, it always struck me that the ombudsman or the reader's rep was primarily a kind of safety valve developed by management to deflect and diffuse a certain amount of reader or listener ire at the publication for being monolithic, arrogant, and unresponsive, rather than something that really strove to make the organization better. It was basically a way of giving the readers a chance to vent and feel like they were having some kind of input.
That depends entirely on the quality of the ombudsman.
But I do think Jeff's point about having that email at the end, and now knowing who writes the editorials, which is something that used to be a very closely guarded secret in most places when I was doing it, that is a much more valuable and lasting contribution toward accountability and transparency than any number of boatloads of ombuds people sort of as the official designated in-house critic.
And let's look at it in a broader context too. Let's come back to the issue of companies as media content producers. And you're the head of communications for a company, and you're responsible for the production of a whole lot of information that you're sending out direct and through a variety of means to your stakeholders. What's at risk? What's at risk if you screw up? Nothing less than the entire organization. The entire brand, everything goes down the tubes if you screw up once, conceivably. So there's a great leveling effect that takes place in there.
Not too late to change a major.
Yeah. So
Nothing less than the entire organization.
Yeah, think about that. Think about what can happen with a major slip-up, when you go direct. Could happen. How about a question over here?
I like fear.
Yeah. This is for Steve. And my name's Albert Ho. I'm an assistant account manager and digital strategist at Consensus Inc. We're a PR firm in downtown LA. And I just want to say I really enjoyed your presentation. And
Thank you.
I read your blog a few years ago. And I read it once because I thought you said something really dumb. And I just,
He's updated it since then.
And I think, but...
Unlike him, I don't remember. I mean, following him through, I don't remember, so...
something about friend feed. You said it was going to be big. And I was like, yeah, right, it's not. I think you were wrong.
Oh, I was
Yeah.
wrong plenty of times. Yeah.
But we need a question.
Okay.
I was definitely
I just
wrong.
want-
Well,
Enough of this
the
nice little-
technology was right, but
This is
the
very nice, but let's
platform
have a
was wrong,
question.
Yeah. I just wanted to comment on something, comment on my comment. You said, you showed that picture of the thank you Facebook, from the crowd in Egypt. And, you're talking about overload in social media. Tell me if I'm right or wrong, but the way I see it is not really overload. It's more of a diluting the effectiveness of social media because, I'm looking at social media and journalism in a different way. It's, this dilution of social media as an effective medium. For example, the media calling it the Facebook revolution in Egypt. I don't know about your stance, but I disagree with that. The tendency to focus on the tool and not the people behind it really has led to lots of really crappy uses of social media and lots of overload. I think that's contributing to a lot of the overload. It's lots of crap out there, and I don't know. You can probably cite this source better than I can, but recently there was a study about businesses saying they weren't getting any returns on Facebook of their Facebook pages.
There was a couple studies that came out. Yeah.
Yeah,
Forrester did one. I think.
Yeah, and then I, immediately thought, same with Twitter, there's lots of spam on there. And it feels like it's going to continue, mainly because when I think about
So we need you to get to a question.
Okay,
conclusion.
no, my comment is not a question. Am I right or wrong to assume that, journalism has really, it's quite, not saying they're guilty, but they're partly responsible for, pushing this as a, focusing more on the tool and not the people behind it.
Well, I think there's definitely a hype bubble. Okay, there's no doubt about it. There was a hype bubble, and now it looks like there's a valuation bubble as well. That I'll let the finance guys argue that one. But I mean, the short answer is that people look. You have a dilution of things that used to work really well, like TV advertising. Okay, we're in a centralized era. So all that money got unlocked, and then it looked for a home. And for a while, I went into search, and that was a very good home for it, for direct kinds of purposes. But for branding, no. And then people began to see a display was eroding, and it started to look for a home. So social became the new shiny thing that home went to in terms of on the marketer side. And it got diluted in terms of the hype in that sense. But I think what ended up happening is that people began to say, well, that's the cure to cancer. And they began to put all the money there and not think about, the holistic system that I showed you. And so I think where this is going to come into play is that stuff that is amplified through social and vice versa, through the press. And also, by the way, what we didn't talk about was paid. I mean, paid media is definitely a big part of this. Advertising is a huge part of this. It will start to come back in. So I think there's been an expectation that was created, but I don't blame anybody but the people who spent the money, which is us too.
Yeah. And let's try to get in just one or two more, and we're going to be out of time. Quickly over here.
Yeah, I'll make mine pretty quick. I was just kind of asking about, on the same general subject with social media, I kind of entered, my limited time when PR practitioners were really planting their flag in social media, saying this is ours, we're going to use it, but really not knowing how. And in the SPR program, especially in the master's program, we've put a huge emphasis, it seems, on social media. And in my view, it seems like social media tends to actually make our job more difficult as the user chooses their own level of involvement. I'm wondering if you agree that social media kind of is less effective only because we have to suss out those corners where the individual users are viewing it.
I think it's effective because you can go direct and you can build a level of engagement that's one-to-one you could never do before. So I think it still remains. It truly is public relations in the true sense of the word, literal. But I think that again, it's the lack of systems thinking that's taking place in marketing overall, and looking at how all these things touch each other, and how that individual is influenced equally by the press as they are by friends, is overlooked. And so I think that planting your flag on social media is not a bad thing. Not at all. I mean, look at me. But I mean, we could look at that both ways.
That wasn't mushy at all. That was very clear.
But again, I think it's if you plant it on, look, how does this integrate with other things? And I think that if you come at it and you understand the mindset of the individual you're trying to reach, and look, you may build a relationship with them directly through social first, and then figure out how to do other things with it. So I think it becomes a connective tissue for a lot of this stuff, and I think it's. I don't mean to poo-poo social. I mean it's still, but where I am kind of throwing a little bit of water on it is that it's not the cure for cancer.
Think strategically.
It seems to me most people think it's a megaphone, and really it's a wind tunnel.
Well, most people just I mean, you'd be surprised what people do on Facebook and Twitter, and they do identical things. That's like going to Japan asking for a crepe. I mean, you don't do that.
Over to here.
Hi, I'm Walter Zeisel. I'm on the public affairs, one of the public affairs managers at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And I'm going to say one of my relationships with regard to PR, besides being a long-time PRSA member, is that I'm probably one of the few people that actually had Ken Smith as a professor when he was at UCLA before he came here. When they did away with the journalism program, and I had him as an undergraduate professor when I was a political science major, and because of him I went to Syracuse and I went to the public relations field, and so I was sort of affiliated with this program for the 21 years. I had a couple of questions for Steve Rebell. One is more general and the other is more specific. The general question I had was, in looking at the four-leaf clover, I'm thinking, okay, you're an advisor from Edelman for a corporation or a large government agency. And my question is, the basis of the clover, I think it makes sense in terms of ways of getting your word out. But I'm just wondering if the intent or the goal of trying to get your experts in these four fields, is this more of a way of establishing credibility and trust in the organization in general? Or do you look at it more in terms of someone's doing a campaign in one aspect to try to get the word out? How do you view that in terms of how you advise your clients as to when they get their experts out and what examples when they use these four different parts of the clover? The second question I have relates to one of the graphics where you had I saw the corp CEOs where the increase in the amount of communications went up 19% in that one period. Those were two different questions I had.
So in terms of the cloverleaf, I think it's the cloverleaf ultimately is we had a lot of debate in our company about that, and we still do. But I mean, it's ultimately the landscape, okay? And the thought leadership is what you bring to it, and you pull through that. We didn't talk about paid in that context. Paid runs through all four of those spheres, and in very powerful amplification ways. Ultimately, I'm looking at that as the ecosystem. And again, if you go to other countries, some of those spheres, it's not drawn to scale. Some of those spheres are massive. I talked to our team in India the other day, and for them, the mainstream sphere is giant, and the others are like far smaller. So it's not drawn to scale. It's very, very simplistic. But I think that where it comes into play, thought leadership is one way to attack the cloverleaf. It's not the only way. It's like your good coach here who likes the triangle offense, Mr. Phil Jackson. I mean, it's lots of ways to do that. Ultimately, I think it's how you look at the cloverleaf as a virtuous cycle, and I think not check off boxes, because I think that happens now. I think everyone's got, I got the social program going, I got a website, right, but they're not thinking about how news travels amongst a group of stakeholders, and then how that is situational, and also context-driven. So I think that what the cloverleaf ends up becoming is where you bring your assets to bear in a way that you activate them towards fulfilling the number of impressions you need to begin to affect behavior change. But I'm saying that thought leadership and other assets are your firepower. Does that make sense?
And the point of the Cloverleaf is that it's a system, right?
Right.
It's a systemic way of
it is a system, but it's the system. It's the ecosystem. It's really an ecosystem, not a system. System to me, and so I think it's a matter of how you move stories across that, and incredible way. In 2 words, but the CEO graphic. I think that's more indicative of just I mean, you can look at it 2 ways. One is that they have the most expertise, arguably, about a company, and so therefore the trust went up because people expect them to be most in the know. On the other hand, I think it's just more kind of like the cyclical nature of how people view CEOs.
Good point. Did we have one last question over there?
If you have time, yeah, I was just not going to get up again.
Yeah.
My question is, so as a PR student, a lot of what we're taught in both PR and marketing is that timing is key. Now, when you can't send an embargoed news release out to Twitter, so how has social media changed relationships with journalists when it comes to exclusivity and timing in your strategies? So
if I could just start that one, if that's all right. We have a whole separate deck on timing because I'll tell you something. You know, like the most popular time for retweeting is 4 o'clock on Friday. And that's when we bury bad news. We do the plant closings and layoffs and all the good stuff that we do. So that goes against thinking. So timing now is absolutely critical. And in terms of the embargoes of stories, I mean, I'll let other folks answer that one. But I mean, in terms of, I think that's overlooked in PR. I mean, it's overlooked in how, especially as it relates to the Cloverleaf, when to time certain stories for greater amplification, and when you ideally want to see stories run. Sometimes the weekend is a great time to see stories run, which in the past wasn't true because people on Twitter might be bored at that moment. So I think the timing aspect is more important than ever.
Great. With that, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Good night.